Welcome. I'm Michael Romita, the President and CEO of the Westchester County Association, the county's business roundtable, and for over 70 years, the collective voice of our professional community. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for this interactive dialogue with New York's Senator Gillibrand. We are also very fortunate to be co-hosting this event with nonprofit Westchester and my friend Jan Fisher, NPW's Executive Director. We have collected your online questions to curate an interactive dialogue with the Senator on the issues that you have identified as most important for our regional economy. There's a lot to discuss with the recent passage of major infrastructure legislation and continued debate in the Senate on the Build Back Better bill. A special welcome to all of the elected officials and of course their staffs for joining us today, including Lisa Hoplik and Kendra David and the rest of Senator Gillibrand's team. Now, I'd like to introduce our County Executive, George Latimer, for a brief special welcome.
Hello, I'm Westchester County Executive George Latimer. I'd like to welcome all of you to this important conversation with my friend and colleague, United States Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Senator Gillibrand has steadfastly proven her dedication and her commitment to champion women's causes and economic impacts. Tonight's topics will range from energy and climate impacts to recent federal legislation, such as the infrastructure bill and how it will help Westchester County and elsewhere in the Hudson Valley. Thank you to nonprofit Westchester and the Westchester County Association for bringing this important conversation to the community.
Now Jan Fisher will introduce the Senator.
Thank you. And thank you to CE Latimer, and thank you, Michael. It is my honor to welcome United States Senator Kirsten Gillibrand here today and to thank you for making time for us. Importantly, thank you for celebrating your birthday with your constituents in Westchester. We thank you for prioritizing the creation of more well-paying jobs to rebuild the middle class, increasing access to good, affordable health care, and improving educational opportunities from pre-K to college or vocational training. Your accomplishments in the Senate are numerous, including a focus on economic empowerment for women, accountability and transparency in government, issues important to seniors, firearm safety, environmental issues, and national and local cybersecurity. The list could go on. I want to tell a personal story. At the beginning of the pandemic, during a time of great uncertainty and fear, my cell phone rang. I was tired and annoyed and thought it was a cold call, but I picked up pretty abruptly, and there you were, introducing yourself, asking me what was keeping me up at night, how my family was, and what issues were important to the nonprofit sector. You listened, asked important questions, and got to work fighting for New Yorkers. So thank you. This time in history, as we all know, is turbulent, yet there is opportunity to address economic and social issues in a very meaningful way through Build Back Better and other federal initiatives. We appreciate and are grateful for the chance to speak with you about these opportunities and challenges from your perspective. Happy birthday and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jan. And you have been on the front lines for so long, and I'm so grateful for your leadership. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And I want to thank our co-host, Michael Romita, and our County Executive, George Latimer, for their leadership and their continuous support and strength throughout Westchester County. I appreciate all the work you do for all of our families. And I want to recognize the Westchester County Association and not-for-profit Westchester for joining us today. The work you guys do on the front lines, not only over the last year and a half, but always, is inspiring, and it makes my job easier in Washington because you're doing the good work on the ground. So when I bring in resources, you know how to invest it and you know where the money would be best spent. So it makes our job for Senator Schumer and I and the delegation much, much easier. So I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and talking to you about what's happening in Washington. We have a lot of very big pieces of legislation in the works in the Senate right now that we're trying to get done by the end of the year. Last week, we passed the continuing resolution to fund the government. That'll last us through February. And this week, we are working to find a path forward on the debt limit. I think Chuck has a deal in place for that as well. We also got the final text for the NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act. That is a bill that I work on very, very intensely every year. I've been working to try to professionalize the military justice system for a long time, particularly how we deal with serious crimes like sexual assault. We had some really good language in the bill, but it got taken out in conference, sadly. The chairman of the House and Senate decided to take it out despite the very strong support we had. We had 66 senators and 220 House members and all the veterans groups and all the constitutional law societies and 29 attorneys general. So we had a lot, but they took it out anyway. But doesn't mean we're not going to stop fighting. We're going to try to get an up or down vote probably in February. So we might be able to keep reforming that. But we got some other provisions in that bill that'll be really helpful to New York. A lot of funding for our bases throughout the state, as well as other national security priorities like funding for protection against terrorism, funding for cyber. We got some funding to create a cyber academy, which I'll tell you about in our Q&A. And we got some money for other national security priorities that affect New York specifically. So there are some good things in the bill. We are also working to finish the Build Back Better bill, which is the bill that is basically the economic infrastructure around all the hard infrastructure. So the kinds of programs that allow people to be at work and get to work, like affordable daycare and universal pre-K, affordable housing, all the energy independent stuff to make energy efficiency and support the green energy industries. So that bill is nearly done, and we're hoping to finish up by next week. So I'm very excited about that. We also just finished the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That's going to have a lot of money for Westchester County. One of the provisions that I put in that bill was the Build Local, Hire Local, which allows for anytime there's a local investment in infrastructure, local workers will get trained to do the jobs. So it allows for more job creation locally, particularly those who are disproportionately left behind in these kind of projects, lower income workers, workers from communities of color, workers who would otherwise not get the training that they would need to be in the building and construction trades. And so it's a real jobs program. So I'm super excited about that. And some of the projects that we think will be able to get funded are Memorial Highway and the Lincoln Avenue corridor in New Rochelle. Those type of projects divide communities and historically harmed communities of color. And so we want to be able to rebuild those highways in a way that is less divisive and more supportive of the communities. And that's also what the Build Local, Hire Local requires. It also includes my bill, the Resilient Highways Act, which will help state invest in infrastructure that can withstand natural disasters. So every time we've had these extreme weather events through all these storms, all the recent ones we just had over the last 3 months, plus historically over the last 10 years, we've seen so much flooding in Westchester. We've seen so many trees down, so many serious weather events. We need to have more resiliency. And so there's money to do exactly that. And then as we go into 2022, my job is to just keep working on behalf of our state to get us more investments into our economy, into our infrastructure. We're trying very hard to get the SALT deduction restored so that middle-class families don't have to pay their taxes twice, which is ridiculous. So we're trying to get that done. We're also trying to invest a little more in arts. Agriculture and manufacturing is 3 sectors of the economy which really create growth. We also have great producers in Westchester that have really solved problems with regard to COVID, not only with therapeutics, but working on vaccines. And so we want to help our healthcare industry as well. And so that's what these bills are designed to do. And I look forward to answering all your questions on these and other issues.
Thank you, Senator, and happy birthday. I think everybody deserves a trumpet fanfare on their birthday. And Jan and I love that whatever you do for the rest of the day, you get a trumpet fanfare.
Thank you.
Thanks for that intro. I'm going to start the conversation on the infrastructure package that was already passed. And then when we start talking about Build Back Better, The social policy aspects of that, we'll bring Jan into the conversation. You talked a little bit about the impact that this legislation is going to have on the Mid-Hudson Valley and Westchester specifically. Certainly roads and business, the roads and bridges are a big part of this. You mentioned the New Rochelle Link, that Memorial Highway overpass, some of the other pure infrastructure projects that are important to Westchester include things like refurbishment of Westchester Airport, which is a regional airport hub, transportation hub for the Hudson Valley. The Penn Access Line, which will connect New York City to the Bronx, to Westchester, to get workers and businesses back and forth. And I want to mention also digital connectivity, which is an issue that is shared by both the business community and the nonprofit community as being incredibly important. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about the impact that the infrastructure legislation will have on Westchester and the Mid-Hudson Valley.
Yes. Well, you listed some of the best projects that we're definitely going to invest in. So as I said, the Build Local, Hire Local and the Resilient Highways Act are in the final bill. And so that will allow for more job training, more local hires, ensure that the jobs stay in our local communities, and ensure that New York State has the funding flexibility to use the money for highway funds and resiliency projects that they see fit. So all the ones you mentioned are ones that our governor and our county exec can prioritize because they're the most important. There's going to have grant programs in them that will be available in the coming months. And that'll include money for the Reconnecting Communities program that will help neighborhoods and communities bifurcated by racially motivated infrastructure. So that will allow for New Rochelle's link that will connect Lincoln Avenue corridor to the downtown area and create green and pedestrian space along the Memorial Highway that will benefit from that funding stream. We also have $39 million for public transportation, $25 billion for airports, $7.5 billion to build a national network of EV infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure, $66 billion to address Amtrak's maintenance backlog, and $2 billion for projects of national and regional significance like the Gateway Project. So I'm very excited about where those investments will go into our state. In addition, there's $55 billion, which is the largest investment for clean drinking water in our entire country's history. So that'll be dedicated funding to replace lead service lines and to address the PFAS problem across our state. This will help rural towns. It'll help low budget cities. It'll help basically water infrastructure throughout our state, which has, I think, $70 billion of unmet sewer needs. So having those resources available will go a long way to helping all size communities throughout New York and throughout Westchester, from Mount Vernon to Yonkers. And I think they'll be able to use those resources directly. And last, we're going to create a grant guide. So it'll be easier for your elected leaders to navigate where they can apply for grant monies. That'll be easy for both municipalities and local leaders to use. And my office will stand ready to help applicants, give them technical assistance, and write letters of support.
Thank you, Senator. The drinking water issue is something that County Executive Latimer actually pointed to in a recent article that was in the Times, and how that's important to Westchester.
It's a huge issue. And without it, people, I mean, if you can't drink and bathe and cook in your water, it's a disaster. So it's one of the most important things we have to invest in.
And it's also part of infrastructure, in the classic sense as well. One of the grant programs that you haven't brought up is a grant program that specifically is for affordable housing. This is also a big issue in Westchester. There's been a tremendous push for affordable housing, a tremendous need, and there's a $5 billion plus grant program to encourage some sort of a form-based zoning for local governments. We have home rule here in Westchester, and sometimes that's an impediment to affordable housing when you have a lot of pushback from local communities and NIMBYisms and things like that. Do you feel like the federal government has a role to play in solving this problem, the affordable housing problem, particularly in circumstances where local governments may provide some pushback to the kinds of necessary development we need to solve the problem?
So I think affordable housing is a huge urgent crisis throughout the whole state. And I know it's a huge issue in Westchester. You need affordable housing so that people that work and raise their children in Westchester can have a place to live. And you have to always be mindful of it. So the affordable housing money will give investment to developers to always be mindful of making sure when they develop housing that there's always affordable units, and that it encourages county execs and cities to have planning so they always know they're integrating these development plans so that you have a livable community across the board for everyone. But I think people have the wrong impression about what affordable housing is. It just means everyone that works in your community can live in your community, which you want. You want your firefighters and your police officers to be living in your local community. You want them to be able to support your children and the local school system by, being among the children that live there. It's really important that your whole community lives together. That makes a stronger community, and that's what affordable housing is for.
This is one of the foundational pillars that my organization, which is a business-focused organization, has identified as important for growing the regional economy. It's also incredibly important to our nonprofit sector. And I know that Jan has a few thoughts on this as well, if we want to bring her in on this point.
Thank you, Michael. That would be great. And thank you, Senator. So we at Nonprofit Westchester are focusing on affordable housing, but we're also focusing on safe and affordable housing. And what we know is that the pandemic and Hurricane Ida once again showed the disproportionate and deadly impact of systemic racism on Black people and Brown people in our communities. We are very concerned about the Mamaroneck River Flood Risk Mitigation Project. Are you confident that the federal government will fund and support this project that we know will save lives, homes, and businesses?
So my assessment of that is that, yes, I think it will be supported, but I don't know for sure. So I would like to do some research to see if that will be in the bill, but I think it would be more likely to be applied for after the bill gets passed.
Okay.
Did you have a sense that have you already applied for that?
So this is a historic, a historic issue. There has been money that has been put in the budget historically for this project.
Is it in the state budget or the federal budget?
It's a federal, state, and county funded program. It's with the Army Corps of Engineers. They did
so within the Army Corps, once it's been funded once by the Army Corps, then they fund it again and again until it's done. So if you've ever had Army Corps money, then it will continue to be funded until it's done. They won't leave it half funded. They won't leave it half done, because once it's been approved as a federal Army Corps project, they will keep investing in it. But let me take the question back and get you a direct answer about timing and when we expect to get the rest of the money and when we think it's going to be finished.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I know there has been some uncertainty around this, more about the implementation of it than the funding. So my question perhaps could have been more around, are you confident about the implementation of it?
Yeah, I think it sounds like it would be done, but let me get you a precise answer to make sure.
Okay, thank you.
Senator, so now we have this infrastructure legislation, historic. There's been Infrastructure Week or Infrastructure Month been talked about in Washington for a decade or so. It became a running joke. Now we finally have legislation passed. The follow-on bill, this Build Back Better legislation, is more of a social policy bill. Now that we have the infrastructure, what is the importance of getting the Build Back Better legislation passed? Why is it now so transformative and potentially important as an add-on piece of legislation?
So the first infrastructure bill was just roads, bridges, sewers, broadband, like the hard infrastructure that we all understand very, very well. The second piece is much more the economic infrastructure or the human infrastructure that is necessary to get people back to work. So for example, it's the kind of stuff that if you don't have daycare in Westchester, working parents can't get to work. If you don't have universal pre-K, then when your child is 3 and 4, you can't get to work. So those are the challenges that this bill is supposed to address. And then to the affordable housing question that we talked about earlier, in Westchester, if there's no affordable housing, then no one can live within an hour of your town. And then, you want your teachers to live in the same community they're teaching. You want all of your public servants to be part of the same community. So that's why I think it's really important that these pieces in Build Back Better are also passed, because it allows the whole economy to work for everybody.
So one piece of the Build Back Better legislation that you mentioned at the outset was the SALT tax deduction limitation, and how this is incredibly important for people in New York and specifically in Westchester. The House did put something in there, raising the deduction from its current limitation of $10,000 to now $80,000. Do you feel that piece of legislation, the SALT tax limitation, is a make or break proposal for you? In other words, if for some reason that got stripped out, would you still support the legislation?
I think the SALT deduction is essential, because nobody should be paying taxes twice on the same money. That's what's so disgraceful. And when Trump changed the SALT deduction, it was so spiteful to his home state and to California and New Jersey and other large states. So I think it's an outrage, and I think it's an issue of principle. We are getting pushed back by some senators that don't want to vote for the bill if it has the SALT deduction out. Well, we're going to push back and say, well, we don't want to vote for it if it's not in. So it needs to be debated. But the truth is, people shouldn't have to pay taxes twice on the same money. It's absurd. You should be able to deduct your state and local taxes, period. And if we have to compromise where the House did and have the cap at 80K, that's where we'll compromise. But the truth is, it's absurd that you have to pay taxes twice on the same money. And I think we should start talking about lowering our state and local taxes so it's more in line with our neighboring states.
Well, that would certainly make us more competitive.
Yeah, and I think we need to have a serious discussion in the state about it, because we can't have higher taxes both locally and statewide and expect people not to leave our state, but also to not have businesses leave. So I think it's an important point for competitiveness is to harmonize tax rates. So I think we should have a debate about that too.
Well, the SALT issue is an issue of primacy, certainly with my membership, and I'm encouraged by hearing your comments.
It's a huge cut on people's budgets. It's a massive amount of money, and it's really harsh to pay taxes twice on the same money.
So now we have the Build Back Better legislation being debated. It's another $1.7 trillion on top of a number of packages that have passed over the last 18 months, somewhere in the range of 6 to 7 trillion in short and long-term stimulus, including the infrastructure package. This is getting very expensive. And what's your sense of whether this kind of spending and debt is serviceable and sustainable on a long-term basis?
So the Build Back Better bill is entirely paid for. So it's not going to add to the debt or deficit at all. And the last iteration of Build Back Better I saw actually paid down some of the debt and deficit. Unfortunately, under Republican presidents, they rang up the debt and deficit every time. And under Democratic presidents, they pay down the debt and deficit every time and create a growing economy. So it's a little bit shocking that people don't understand that we are extremely good with paying as we go because we care about it. But this bill is totally paid for.
The CBO had some issue with the payment of it. I think it was something that has to do with, providing
the tax
more
gap. Yeah, they estimated that the tax gap wasn't as wide, and they thought there might be a $200 billion difference. But the economists have looked at it, said no, the tax gap was accurate. But even if that's $200 billion, that's an amount of money we can make up. So it's a very small amount of money in the grand scheme of the bill. But I think the economists are right and CBO is wrong.
You're talking about something that's stretched out over a 10-year period as
well.
Yeah,
it's $20 billion a year. So it's in the grand scheme of the investment, it's the kind of money you can find another pay for. So we can pay for it.
So Senator, the substance of the Build Back Better bill Jan Fisher wants to take the lead on some of these issues: higher education, childcare, etc. So Jan, why don't you take over the conversation from here?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Senator. So to start with higher education, Build Back Better expands access to education beyond high school, which has become unaffordable to too many families. The Build Back Better framework will increase the maximum Pell Grant by $550. It will also make investments in historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, and minority serving institutions, invest in practices that help more students complete their degree or credential, and enable community college to train students, create opportunity with in-demand training, and invest in proven approaches like registered apprenticeships and programs to support underserved communities. These things are important to both the nonprofit and business sectors, and certainly to institutions of higher education. How do we ensure that these steps towards racial equity and opportunity in our educational system are sustained? And how do we realize measurable results relative to historic racism in other systems, including healthcare, housing, and the workforce? And I realize that's a lot. So anything you want to address in terms of Build Back Better and the Pell Grant and the opportunity to address racial equity would be great.
So the question of racial inequity is a very, very big question. And one of the biggest ways, in my opinion, to begin to address systemic racism is through education. And some of the greatest inequities is at the beginning of education, not having access to a good, affordable daycare with high quality early learning, not having access to pre-K, 3 and 4-year-olds, pre-K, universal kindergarten, and then not having access to good public schools. And so part of Build Back Better has this early childhood education component. It has money for affordable, high quality daycare, and it has to subsidize it across the country. And it has money for universal 3 and 4-year-old pre-K, which again will standardize early education so that every 3 and 4-year-olds can have a better early childhood education. And we know that for every dollar you put in, you get $11 to $13 out in productivity in terms of that kid's life, not getting behind in math and in reading, and really changing the outcome for a kid when they get into first grade. It's why Head Start was always such an effective program. It was one of the best programs for communities of color to get their kids into an early childhood education program that worked. But it was always underfunded and there was never enough of it. There was never enough of the money. So there was never enough slots for the number of kids. So that's one piece that I think is really important. There's another, in terms of racial inequity, there's some money in this bill for healthcare, particularly for maternal mortality. The statistics for Black women in our country are terrible. You are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth or within a year of giving birth if you are a Black woman in America, for a lot of reasons. Some of it is because of a lack of training. Some of it is because of a lack of emergency equipment on hand. Some is because of racial bias and Black women not being heard, not being listened to by healthcare providers. And so we have a group of bills. There's 3 of them, one that I wrote, one that Cory Booker wrote, one that Kamala Harris wrote, called the Momnibus. And I understand that the Momnibus is going to be part of Build Back Better. So that's just one tiny piece, but it's a really important piece. And if you're talking about long-term racial equity and opportunity, just making sure mothers survive birth and can raise their children really matters. And really going at the heart of the racial inequities in our healthcare system, that there's inadequate training to address biases and access. There's also some money in there called the Community School Expansion Act, which would deliver about $3.6 billion to expand community schools in New York State and around the country, which would provide integrated student support, expanded and enriched learning opportunities, collaborative leadership, and family and community engagement. And it would include things like medical, mental, nutritional health services, mentoring, youth development programs, continuing education courses. Portchester School District already has a functioning community school model, and Mount Vernon is in the process of planning theirs. So these resources could go to those existing programs, which I think would make a huge difference. The bill also requires that we help improve access to higher education by making it more affordable. And the way we would do this is try to reduce access to college and make it more debt-free. So I have several bills called Debt-Free College Act and the College for All Act and the America's College Promise Act. These bills would basically address the student loan crisis in the country, particularly for communities of color, because Black graduates have on average $25,000 more in student debt than do white college graduates. So I've been advocating for borrowers to be able to refinance student loan debt like they refinance all other debt. And it's led to efforts to reform the public service loan forgiveness programs, which provide individuals working in public service loan with debt forgiveness. So those bills are not in Build Back Better because the free college aspects got taken out. It was something that Senator Manchin did not want included, but this is a group of ideas that President Biden believes in. So I think I can work towards some of this debt forgiveness ideas with President Biden over the next couple of years. And so I am optimistic about improving on that. And then last, I have a legislation that I'm working on called Jumpstart Our Businesses by Supporting Students or Jobs Act. And this would expand the Pell Grant's eligibility to students enrolled in rigorous and high quality short-term job training programs that lead to industry-based credentials and would help students gain employment in high-wage, high-skill industries like advanced manufacturing. And Westchester County has a lot of advanced manufacturing that are eager to get more locally trained skilled workers. Westchester Community College, Mercy College, Pace University, Greyston, West Hab, and West Cop are just some of the institutions in the county that are working hard to meet workforce needs. And there'll be money in this Build Back Better bill to fund workforce development programs that each of those schools should be eligible to get.
There's also Manhattanville College, Iona College, Mercy. The expansion of the Pell Grants is a very important issue for them, both for accessibility to it and the increase in the maximum Pell Grant amount itself.
Yep.
So I'm glad you brought that up, Senator. It's an important issue.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a really thoughtful and thorough answer.
Well, you asked a big question.
Yes, that was, thank you so much. I appreciate you actually answering it with depth and a lot of thought. I do want to give a special shout out to Cheryl Brannon and Sister to Sister International, who have been calling attention to the Black maternal health issue.
Yes.
And I want to thank you, Senator, for bringing it up. It's a really important issue. I'm going to talk about the digital divide now. Our member organizations, Westchester Children's Association and Pace University, continue to work on the digital divide with release of a 2022 report on the ongoing needs for broadband devices and computer training. Two questions emerge. How do we build on the infrastructure bill to include the training needed for students and parents, guardians to fully utilize online access? And how do we more fully actualize broadband as a utility now, necessary for school, work, healthcare, and more?
Well, let me start with your last question. I truly believe broadband should be seen as a utility in the way water and electricity was seen, early in our history. These are basic civil rights to have access to broadband, and small businesses can't compete, can't sell worldwide if they don't have access to broadband, and kids can't learn if they don't have access to broadband and high-speed internet. So I'm working with Governor Hochul to ensure that federal funding is delivered where she needs it most from this infrastructure bill, so we can get last mile done. And so in lower income communities, every family has a computer and a tablet, every family has Wi-Fi so they can hook up to online learning. You know, God forbid we have another pandemic and kids have to stay home from school again. But we now know we can do online learning. So when a kid's home from school because they're having an asthma attack, which happens often, they can hopefully key into school and be able to continue to participate and not have to miss so many days of school as they did in the past. So I'm hopeful that with some of the lessons learned from the pandemic, we can do more telehealth and we can do more telelearning as long as we get everybody, we close the digital divide. In terms of some of the issues that nonprofit Westchester and Westchester County Association have been tackling for years, I do want to thank you guys for your ongoing work to create digital parity for Westchester residents. Our infrastructure bill does have $65 billion for broadband deployment and to make broadband access more affordable for low-income families. Of those funds, $2.75 billion are specifically set aside for 2 new NTIA grant programs to promote digital inclusion and equity for communities without skills, technologies, and support needed to take advantage of the broadband connections. So these programs are designed to promote digital inclusion through digital literacy training, through workforce development and digital access programs. And the bill specifically will set aside an additional $14.2 billion to create permanent, sustainable, affordable connectivity benefits to ensure low-income families can connect to the internet. The program also will provide about, I think it's $30 a month. It's a voucher for low-income families to use towards any internet service plan of their choosing. And this will, this is against the backdrop of the overall $42.45 billion investment for grants to states, which will then do the work of making sure the last mile and getting tablets into every home gets done.
Senator, I mean, I'm glad you brought all of this up. I mean, one of the things that gets overlooked for a county like Westchester is a lot of the federal money for digital equity and digital infrastructure often gets steered towards rural areas, and very often suburban communities get overlooked. But there are certainly a number of dense urban cores in Westchester where the need is very great. In some areas, by census tract, it's over 20% of the households which either don't have access to the internet or don't have a device. So one of the things to make sure that you brought your attention to that, and it sounds like some of the issues that you're talking about would help to bridge that gap and solve those issues.
I'm going to jump to childcare now, and thank you for being such a champion of childcare. Build Back Better, as you mentioned, offers transformative investments in childcare and caregiving. And again, thank you for your leadership. Do you have any thoughts on how we ensure that the childcare and pre-K funding is truly coordinated at the state level and results in options that also meet the needs of working parents?
So the federal investments in childcare and early education that's in the Build Back Better bill are envisioned to be a state-federal partnership. So the funds would basically flow through existing childcare and development block grants and Head Start programs to ensure that the states have the ability to target the funds to families and areas with the greatest need, since most states already have those programs set up where they're needed. We also know that the childcare affordability and accessibility are 2 of the greatest barriers for working families in Westchester and around the country. So this bill will help address those issues by basically taking the federal funds, sending it to the state. The state will distribute the funding directly to these programs, but also directly to eligible families based on an income sliding scale that ensures no family will pay more than 7% of their gross income for the existing programs. So funds will also address childcare deserts by enabling states to open new childcare centers and early education programs and increase the number of slots in existing programs. Because in New York, post-pandemic, we only have 1 slot for every 8 kids that want a childcare slot. So we need infrastructure built up. We need more daycare centers built. We need more early childhood educators trained. So organizations like the Child Care Council of Westchester and the providers under that umbrella, YMCA, White Plains and Central Westchester, and the YMCA in Central and North Westchester will be able to benefit from this to be able to provide more slots, provide more training, and work on creating the infrastructure so they can serve all the needs of Westchester families.
Thank you. I had a number of other questions. We're running a little behind on time. So if it's okay with you, I would like to jump to a question on immigration. So a high priority among our member organizations is finding a path to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented immigrants. Most are families that are an important part of our community and contributing to our economy in a significant way. As you probably know, I'm sure you know, most families have people of different status within the family. So undocumented parents may have a US citizen child, or an undocumented person may have a US citizen spouse. What are your thoughts on the parole option that the parliamentarian is expected to rule on, which does not provide a pathway to citizenship and sunsets after 10 years, risking deportation and family separation? Would you commit to rejecting the parliamentarian's ruling and include promoting a path to citizenship for a large percentage of the undocumented community?
So you can't really reject the parliamentary's ruling. I don't know how you overrule her, but I can look into that. But I support a pathway to citizenship for all the undocumented families in America. We have a window of opportunity to pass meaningful, comprehensive immigration reform, but it's really short, and it's literally between now and the end of this Congress if we do reconciliation reform. And Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema and maybe others who I don't even know do not want to do filibuster reform, and they don't want to allow us to do these 50 threshold votes. And so it's frustrating. So adding this provision to the reconciliation package is really important. So I don't know that we're allowed to overrule her, but we have to act now before the end of this Congress, or we won't get to do the things that we want to do. I think there's some things you can do in a bipartisan way, but it's very minimal. I think the pathway to citizenship, we should stick in this reconciliation bill. Now, we might be able to just pass the bill, and then I just don't know what happens. I have to figure that out. I didn't think you could overrule a parliamentarian's ruling. Let me ask my LD. Hold on a second.
I have a clarifying note from one of our member organizations.
Yeah, you can't overrule a parliamentary's ruling.
So what I have here is that the vice president can overrule it, but the Senate can let it go. But I think the more important thing is, making, of course, you are aware of the importance of this issue to our membership, and we are
of course.
And we are
Especially
grateful.
Westchester being as diverse as it is. I mean, we have so many families that are in limbo, and just think of all the kids that are going to school in our colleges that you don't know if they have the ability to stay. Our DACA recipients are among the most vulnerable. And not only do we have kids in college, but we have people serving in our military. So making sure people can have a pathway to citizenship is really important. But the issue of undocumented immigrants in general, this COVID epidemic, they were on the front lines of every critical industry, literally all of them, whether it was healthcare and being nurses or doctors or EMTs, or whether it was first responders, or whether it was pharmacy workers or grocery store workers. They did everything to keep this community thriving and living and surviving. And we have to have their back. And so whether we're fighting for the Dreamers or TPS recipients or farm workers, we should be putting it all in this bill. And there's several of us in the Senate who are 100% committed to getting as much into this reconciliation bill as we can, so that we have some positive movement forward, because we've gotten nothing done in the last decade. We have this one thing, the Senate parliamentarian is currently considering whether the immigration provision can be included, the part that we've written in. and she might just allow it. So there's a chance that it actually can stay in. So I think we just fight, articulate our views aggressively so people understand it. And if we fail, then try to filibuster reform and do it as just an up or down vote and have all Democrats vote for it. I support legislation, the Fair Proceeding Act, which would guarantee access to counsel for immigrants in all removal proceedings. I support the Pro-Kid Act, which is legislation to establish an ombudsman for improved oversight for unaccompanied children that are in government custody. And I also support just a comprehensive immigration and reform bill that does all the things that we want to do to protect immigrant families in this country. So I just think it's an urgent crisis, and we should do everything we can to demand support for it amongst our party, and then hope that it stays in the bill. And then if not, really urge for the filibuster reform.
Well,
Thank
Senator, there's so much we
Michael, I'm
haven't
going to
done.
hand it over to you to close.
There's so much we haven't covered. We didn't even get to Glasgow and climate change, but we're making your staff incredibly angry. So we appreciate the time that you've given us today. We hope you'll come back at some point to fill in some of the blanks on some of the issues we did not get to. We know you have a 2:30 press conference, and it's great to see you on behalf of my membership at the WCA, Jan Fisher, and her membership at NPW, and the entire Westchester community. Thank you so much for spending your birthday with us today.
My pleasure. And I'll get you answers on the other questions I wasn't sure about.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
you.
you.
Were amazing. Thank you. You fully answered.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Michael. That was great.
Thank you, Senator. Good luck later on, and happy birthday again. Have a great holiday with your family.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.